Hi, I'm here today with Jeff Wilson from Harvard, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and then to tell me a little bit about whether or not he'd done any of online teaching before the pandemic started.
Hi there, my name is Jeff Wilson. I teach in the writing program at Harvard. I teach the Shakespeare section of our first year writing course. It's titled Why Shakespeare Grapples with Shakespeare's Prominence and Afterlives in the Modern World. I had taught an online course in, I want to say 2012, and it was a disaster. It was not a good experience for me. I was not good at it. I was relatively early in my teaching experience, so I kind of wasn't really that good at teaching to begin with, and I was trying to learn how to teach online at the same time. And I was extremely robotic. It felt like reading a conference paper at an academic conference. You can imagine what a gripping course that would be for an 18-year-old student. So I really soured on the idea of online teaching, and I kind of sour graped it a little bit. So I said, you know, you need physical presence in the classroom. You need to kind of have that for good conversation. And that was the attitude I maintained for quite a while until I think I want to say it was probably 2018 or so. And I was at a dinner and I had a conversation with a colleague, Ayanna Thompson, who made the point to me. She's at Arizona State and was talking about how Arizona State has a huge online education platform. They do tons of that work. And she pointed out to me that this opens up education for so many people that otherwise wouldn't have access to that kind of education. And that was a big kind of turning point for me because, you know, kind of ideologically, I was very committed to that. And so I kind of found out that when I centered the student experience as opposed to centering my own experience with online education, I was much more receptive to it, much more excited about it. And then the following summer, I taught my first online class through Harvard Extension School, which is bringing in people from all around the world, which is great. You get a nice mix of perspectives. And we got actually some extensive training in how to do online courses. And it was, you know, the nuts and bolts of using the technology as well as the pedagogy involved. And, you know, I feel like that was a lifesaver then in March 2020 when emergency happens and everything goes into shutdown and everyone is in crisis mode. I would have been toast if I hadn't had that experience of doing a couple online classes beforehand. But at the same time, I'm very aware of the fact that, you know, there are resources at Harvard to give people training for doing online classes that most universities don't have. And I think, you know, that would be something to think about. But it was really fascinating to me when the coronavirus pandemic hit that the kind of hierarchy between Harvard College and Harvard Extension, which has always been, you know, the college is the prestige place, the extension school, maybe not so much, but as soon as everything went online, that totally flipped. Because now the Harvard Extension School had all the knowledge, had all the experience, had all the background, had all the infrastructure, had all the staff to do online education, and they had all the power. They had all the training. Everyone was coming to Harvard Extension to say, how do we do this thing? And they've been doing it for years and years in effective ways. So that was an interesting dynamic to see unfold.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I guess that I'm interested in is certainly all of the economic and technical aspects, but also, as you say, making things available to people who wouldn't have had access otherwise. But I'm kind of interested, my next question is about the difference in my mind, because I've spent a lot of time on digital resources, as you know, and I've used those in class extensively. But did you use any digital resources in your classrooms before it went online, or was it always just a, you know, talk and chalk slash, you know, workshop style?
Yeah, we kind of become increasingly digitally literate in the class over the course of the 2010s, I think. And so the semester that in fall, spring 2020, to set the stage for kind of when the pandemic hit, we were in the second unit of our Shakespeare course, which asked students to write a multi-source essay. And what I do is I pick one Shakespeare text, and I pick a modern social scientific theory, and I pick a modern adaptation, and students can pick about, kind of which text they're most compelled by that they want to put Shakespeare in conversation with. So this semester, we were doing Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing, which is maybe my favorite Shakespeare text because it's pure joy. And we were putting that in conversation with a modern adaptation, the Public Theater's Much Ado About Nothing, which stages the play Shakespeare's romantic comedy with an all-Black cast in Central Park under Stacey Abrams' 2020 banner. And then our social scientific theory was a book by a fellow named Jeffrey Hall called The Five Flirting Styles, which is a book that, buyer beware. It's got some issues with it, but allowed us to think about the different flirting styles you see with Beatrice and Benedict, characters in Shakespeare's plays, Claudio and Hero. So we were in maybe the second or third class about Much Ado About Nothing when it's 8:30 in the morning on a Tuesday and a campus-wide announcement goes out that we're sending everyone home and I have to teach at 9 a.m. And I mean, as every teacher knows that went through that, how do you even walk into that situation? Absolutely. I will never forget, I went to class and I rounded the corner to go into the room, and the first student I meet is kind of eyes welling up with tears and says, I don't have a home to go home to. This is my home. And it was just, on the one hand, extremely frustrating and difficult that I think ultimately policy-wise, schools made the right decision to send students home, but at the same time, there were certainly opportunities for better execution in the way that came about. For me, there was a clear divide between some of the administration that was having to deal with this on a very impersonal level, and some of the teachers and some of the staff at schools who were just, working our hearts out to try to kind of make this an okay situation for our students who were dealt such a tough hand here. It was just, it was on the level of the folks who interact the most with the students. It was inspiring to see teachers who love their students, love their jobs, recognize the value and the importance of education, higher education, really showing up for their students, I thought, in powerful ways.
Well, and again, what I've talked to with other colleagues about is the fact that I think, we like the illusion of the fact that once people come to the university, they're all kind of on a level playing field. But once you're actually video conferencing into their homes, and you see that some kids have, palatial bedrooms and, all the equipment, and other kids are sharing, in a tiny bedroom with siblings, and there's noise. And, I think that it really puts us to the test in terms of our theoretical allegiances and what you're actually able to do in terms of, helping kids in the class. So my next question is really about how you adapted to that. How did you change your approach once you had to go online?
Yeah, what you say is so true, right? That the pandemic going remote really revealed the disparities that are operating for a lot of our students, especially at a place like Harvard, where, I've got classes and some kids are Zooming in from the sunroof on their Fifth Avenue apartment, and others are having to nail a sheet to the corner of a bedroom so that they can have a little space, and their face is so close to the camera because they don't physically have the space to move their computer farther away from them. And I think, a lot of teachers recognize in the abstract the disparities and the difficulties that our students go through, but the way in which that kind of became very real very quickly and highlighted those issues, which kind of manifested along lines of race, manifested along lines of mental health, was a big wake-up call for a lot of folks, probably myself included. For me, as soon as it became clear that we were in emergency mode and you hear back from some of your students, and usually those are some of the students who have good support structures, and you don't hear back from some of your other students, and those are some of the ones who have less support. The first thing I did was a kind of personal email to every student, right? It wasn't kind of a big group blast to say, hey, can you just check in with me? It was, Philip, how are things going? Bernadette, is everything, are you in an okay place? And that took a lot of time, but it sort of let you know who you needed to follow up with, who was in an okay place, who you might want to connect with some university resources that can help, help with the situation there. All of this is happening, of course, while the public schools in my town are closing down, and I've got my two kids, a first grader and a second grader, who are now home 24 hours a day. And from the teacher side of things, we're scrambling to try to figure that out. And I mean, it was, I will say I was lucky to have a background as a teacher, because, the Thursday that our public schools shut down, I was able to that weekend put together a kind of daily schedule of how we were going to go about it. And we were getting maybe, in the first 2 weeks, nothing from the school, because who could prepare for that? The teachers, they're not ready for that. So we were able to put together our little kind of homeschool curriculum, and we had our humanities unit and our math unit and our social science unit and our etiquette unit, and it was good to have that background as a teacher, to know I'm going to need to think really carefully about how the rhythm of this day is going to go, about how the rhythm of this week is going to go, about if we're going to want to focus on something next week, we need to have this conversation early in this week. So we're trying to figure all of that out. In terms of strategies for teaching the actual classes, I found that the best thing that I could do, well, two things. The best thing that I could do is I needed to spend a lot of time thinking about in advance and devoting to the minutes in the class, building class community. Because that's something that happens in the informal kind of sitting down at the table style conversations. What did you do last night? How are things going? That an online remote class just isn't really receptive to fostering those kinds of conversations. So you need to give minutes in the classroom to that kind of community building. And so we would do, just stupid things like a Zoom uniform contest, so business up top and pajamas down below, right?
Right. Yeah,
so I heard someone recently call it the clothes mullet, where it looks nice in the front and then
you turned around. Excellent. Yes.
And we did, the Meet Your Pet stuff, and
oh, fantastic.
We voted for the best Romeo and Juliet musical adaptation.
Okay.
But my absolute favorite was something that I'd wanted to do in physical classes for a long time, but it wasn't really possible, but to do a family and friends day, where people were able to, bring in their family and friends and sort of say, this is what we do in our class. This is, what it's like to go to class and to talk about these issues. And that brings kind of a theater festival vibe to the class, right?
Yeah.
We're now less kind of having these deep, sincere intellectual conversations, and we're more kind of connecting up with daily life and thinking about how this matters for life beyond campus and outside of academia, and how can we kind of make some of those connections, build some of those bridges. The second key strategy that I found, just kind of nuts and bolts for teaching online, was most teachers will have that experience of asking an open question to a Zoom room and it's just crickets, right? There's people don't know when to unmute and chime in, and people don't know, and then 4 people do unmute at the same time and then say, you go, no, you go. So what I did was I just made a discussion order, and we've got our 13 or however many people listed in the class, and for questions. And so if I asked a question to the class, I'd say, okay, I'm going to toss it to you 3, Jane and Larry and so forth. And then kind of that helped sort of the rhythm of the conversation develop. And then later in the conversation, people were kind of invested and they were involved, and we didn't have to take such a deliberate approach to it, but that really helped to allow those kinds of conversations that are more organic in a physical setting to really come into an online setting in an effective way.
Well, and I think you're talking about a couple of things that are kind of at the intersection of what you do and what I do. The whole digital element, but also the public Shakespeare, because bringing people's families in is a form of public Shakespeare to me. In that sense of expanding the conversation beyond the boundaries of the people in the room, which inevitably happens, and we hear about anecdotally, but you don't get to see it more often than not. And so I think one of the things you've already sort of started to answer the question, but the next question is about the benefits of working in this way. Do you see real benefits?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by the ways that when we go back into a physical setting, how our pedagogy is going to change based on all the thoughtfulness we've had to give to it over the past 6 months. Yeah. And I honestly, I want to say kind of maybe senior teachers who have been teaching their classes in a similar way for a long time, this is going to be a good opportunity for folks to kind of rethink pedagogy. And that'll be fascinating to see. Just the amount of hours we've had to spend thinking about how am I going to make this a good hour and 15-minute session? That maybe we wouldn't have thought that deeply about pedagogy beforehand. And that'll be good to see how that kind of pays off. Yeah, and so, other little things, assignment, I remember we did in the week, 2 days before our students were going to disperse from campus. The argument of our writing course is, better living through interpretation, right? We're teaching you not how to write essays about Shakespeare, but about how to think, how to argue, how to write. And so if you can interpret things in Shakespeare, that's going to be beneficial for helping you interpret things outside. And so our last session before we dispersed, I just had them do an in-class essay saying, you've been interpreting Shakespeare, and let's change the thing that you're interpreting to Harvard University's response to the coronavirus pandemic. They wrote 20-minute essays about it. It allowed them to process things. It allowed them to sort of elevate from the frustration and the anger and the difficulty to a kind of an intellectual response to sort of say, how can we make sense of this? Who has been doing good work? Who has not been doing good work? What could be better ways that the university could be doing this? So that was nice. Another thing we did in class was about 2 weeks after lockdown, maybe a little bit more, about 3 or 4 weeks after lockdown, we were getting to the point in our class where we were talking about literature reviews, about how to, map out the scholarship on a topic and then carve out a space for yourself to speak there. And so often those are, hostile and so what we did was I had students write 2 letters. They first wrote a thank you letter to someone who had helped them out during the coronavirus pandemic. And then the second letter they wrote was to someone who thought that they could be doing a better job. And here are some suggestions about how they could be doing a better job. And then we use that as an analogy to think about how do you enter into an academic conversation. So who has helped you do your academic work, right? Hey. And a literature review can be a thank you note to that person. Who do you think could be doing things a little bit better? And how might you make some suggestions for them to rethink this issue that they're working on? And all of that in a way that is not, aggressive and hostile and cable news style hot button debate, but in a way that the person that you're speaking with is going to read what you're writing, and that you need to be, 1, accurate in the way that you represent their actions, and 2, productive and constructive in the way that we're kind of moving a conversation forward. So little things like that, kind of created opportunities for us to use this really difficult situation that we just responded to as best as we could in the moment to rethink the way that we've always been doing things.
Well, and again, as that's one of the things that I've also been interested in a long time is pedagogy, and getting people to take it seriously has been a really difficult thing. Their scholarship was serious, and pedagogy was something you did on the side. And if people had a conversation about teaching, they tend to be slightly embarrassed about it. And so, like you say, I think colleagues have really got engaged and really understood how difficult it is to do things well if you're really going to put the, the effort that you're talking about to structure that debate in a way that is really productive in those minutes, but also then has a sort of afterlife and then prepares them for the next set of conversations. But that's one of the other things that people have been talking about, is the fact that, as you pointed out, at the end of term, you were thrust into this situation, but at least you knew your student groups. Whereas at the beginning of this term, you're in a different situation. You're having to create that, excuse me, that sense of community. Have you, I guess, so the next question is about, drawbacks, I guess. Have you had any real senses of frustration yourself? You've talked about the students' frustration, but what about yours? Are there things that didn't work? Sorry, did you hear the question?
Sorry, Christy, it broke up a little bit there.
Okay, sorry. The final bit of that question was just to say, were there drawbacks that things that frustrated you? You talked about the students' frustration, but did you have real moments when you thought, this is never going to work? Things that brought again that sense of frustration, which sometimes again brings a moment of epiphany in a strange way.
Yeah, that's for a Shakespeare class. Any Shakespeare teacher knows if the class day is dragging, let's just do some lightning theater. Let's do a performance. Let's play a scene. It's going to bring energy into the room. Everyone's going to have a good time. They're called plays for a reason, because they're so much fun. Yeah. And how do you do that, in a Zoom setting where two people can't face each other or interact, on a mock-up stage? But I will say, one of my favorite moments of our class from spring 2020 was when it was a day like that, and things were kind of dragging a little bit, and so we did an impromptu Zoom performance. We were doing Much Ado About Nothing, as I mentioned, of the masquerade scene in Much Ado About Nothing, where they put masks over their faces, and the couples that are involved can't tell who's on the other side of the mask, which is an absurd situation that no one ever buys. Yep. But here we are in this coronavirus pandemic where everyone has their masks with them. And for the first time, this is actually a conceivable scene where you've got face coverings of masks and people couldn't tell who was who. And there's, it's a kind of, the way that Shakespeare wrote the scene is there's kind of dancing, and then you cut to a little bit of conversation and flirting. Excuse me. And with that performance, there was just a breath of exhale for the entire class that had a month of stress from coronavirus built up, and they were dancing in their bedrooms, and everyone just kind of had a moment of joy, and we sort of thought, this is going to be okay. We're going to make it through this, and that was good to see.
Well, I think, as you say, there are. I think students don't realize how much you have tricks up your sleeve if things aren't going to plan, and that you just, you smooth over the rough edges a little bit. And so what you're describing is what, again, I think that the medium and the environment has made us realize, is that we're all in this together. And so I think a lot of the students are having a greater involvement and a greater engagement. And also, it's up to them to help make it work, right? The teacher isn't in charge so much anymore. It is a sort of level playing field in a way.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a connection here, but without question, the best batch of student papers that I've ever gotten in my life were the ones that they turned in, that they wrote during that month of coronavirus lockdown. I don't know. So this was about Much Ado and the public theater and the 5 flirting styles. Which is bizarre because they've got so much going on in their lives. They're so distracted. But everyone was just kind of in this intense, moment of focus and thought and scrambling, and we were all kind of in, highly emotional, a little bit exhausted, and it was inspiring to see the work that they did for those essays. And then the amazing thing. was that as soon as I read their essays on the public theaters, Much Ado About Nothing, I knew these are too good to be confined to our class, that these are essays that the world needs to see. So what happened was 5 of the students took their essays that they wrote during this month in their life where everything was turned upside down, and they pitched them to the website Literary Hub.
Oh, great.
And Literary Hub was able to publish a collaboratively written essay by these 5 students. So Arsh Dillon, Philip Mihalik, Bernadette Looney, Sonia Conjigu, and Charles Onesti, called Black Lives Matter in the Public Theaters, Much Ado About Nothing. They took their essays that they wrote for our class, which were 5, and each of them were 8 pages long. They trimmed them down. They just put in the fire and made them into, 5, maybe 500, 600 word segments, put together this amazing collaboratively written piece that spoke not only to the ways in which life had been turned upside down in the coronavirus pandemic, but also the following month after the murder of George Floyd, when Black Lives Matter protests re-erupt, and everyone, just the swirl of kind of intense chaos that was going on around us, to see the youth of our society kind of bringing intelligence and thoughtfulness and knowledge to those situations in ways that connect the past to the present, was one of the most memorable and meaningful experiences I've ever been lucky to be a part of.
Fantastic. And I think that's the thing that I think is worth recording, is that, if ever there was a time when theater kind of, and I do think that what we do in the classroom has an element of theater about it, needs to be captured. It's now. And like you say, some extraordinary things are happening. And I think that freedom that people have felt, like that they don't have to pretend that they don't have, a penthouse in on Fifth Avenue, because they're up against people that do. And Royal Holloway is a similar sort of environment. We had some very wealthy kids and some really not wealthy kids. And there was a real effort to bring those kids into the environment, but not a huge amount of effort to give them the support that they felt they needed. They felt they had to perform a kind of role, I think, when they were in the classroom. So I think like what we are saying is to let them bring those things into the classroom, then make something out of them, and then bring them back out of the classroom again. That kind of, interacting with the public world is so powerful. But also what you were talking about was your own. I think there's, the teachers, staff have been pretending for a long time that there's a level playing field for us. And to recognize that people with kids and people, who are working in environments where they don't have secure jobs are also, there are extra stresses that they are facing. So I think, being allowed to say all that stuff is really kind of important and powerful. And, like all the inequities in society we're highlighting. So I don't want to take too much more of your time, because I know you're super busy because of all this stuff. But I just wanted to ask you if you had a tip or two for somebody who's just starting out, because that's really what I'm doing this for people, to give a sense of solidarity to people who've never done this and are really struggling a little bit. What would you tell somebody who's brand new to teaching online?
I think the students are kind of coming so anxious, so uncertain about all of this. They just need license to know that they can bring their lives, they can bring their identities, they can bring their backgrounds, their experiences into this situation. And they need an opportunity to sort of, some space to give thought and knowledge to the experiences that they're having. And so let's just kind of create that space in class. Let's spend the minutes in class to think and talk and write about these very of the moment things that we're going through in a little bit of heightened ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think you've already answered this, but if there is another example, just one thing that might have happened in this environment that like would never have happened in any other environment, that suddenly you, came up. You've already mentioned the outcome of those terrific essays. Is there anything that's happened in the term that you're just starting that is different from, and unexpected, I guess?
Yeah, adrenaline's going to kind of get us through for so far, but that's only going to last for so long. So as I'm teaching my classes, as I'm chatting with you, I've got, you know, a pod of 5 second grade girls who are doing class in my basement, and we have to think about, is our Wi-Fi going to be able to handle 7 Zoom calls at once? And I, that, you know, was not expected, but I think all of us kind of, you know, when we look back on our lives, we're going to remember the 2 months that we were able to spend with our families that, you know, maybe created some bonds, maybe kind of tested others. And you know, that's the stuff that we're all looking for, is those kind of connections with family, friends, with strangers. That's why Shakespeare matters. Shakespeare matters not because, you know, he taught us great things about life. You know, the play is not the thing. The thing is the connections we make through Shakespeare's plays that otherwise wouldn't have happened without that theatrical artistic event. But it's the conversations that we have with each other, with strangers, that artistic event allows us to come into existence. Is, you know, so those just kind of bringing a deeper sense of emotion and thoughtfulness to our daily lives is one thing that's come of this. I also was able to do a book release party in April 2020 while everyone was on lockdown, and that was an interesting experience.
Absolutely.
I've never been so nervous bringing students and scholars and family all together on the same Zoom call, because you never know what they're going to say.
Well, this thing of, as somebody else said, we're all on the same page, you know, it takes away that hierarchical, you know, teacher at the front of the classroom. And we put up these barriers, we put up these, you know, and we think we're doing it for other people, but we're, you know, protecting ourselves as well. So I guess that's the final question is, what are you going to take forward in your teaching from all of this? You've clearly been through a lot, learned a lot. What are you going to take in, if we ever get back into class? How will it have changed you as a teacher?
I think maybe the biggest kind of learning opportunity has been just, you know, sometimes it's going to take 4 hours of thinking and planning and pedagogy to get a really good half-hour conversation in my class, and that's worth it. And so when we go back into physical spaces, you know, we can think about how we're going to create those memorable moments in our class where, because some really thoughtful planning, but then also just being open to the accidents and the contingencies that happen in a conversation, create a memorable moment for students. And, you know, I'm sure 12 months from now, there's going to be a swell of pedagogy articles from people who have, you know, not really thought a whole lot about pedagogy in the past, but now had to do that. And I suppose my hope for those of us who have been thinking about pedagogy and how to create great classroom environments is that we don't say, well, you know, you should have been doing this the whole time, but we say kind of welcome to the party.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, one of the things that, you know, I think when you start out in teaching, you're kind of wedded to what you've set out for the class. And if it goes off, you know, off piste, you think, oh, the class was ruined. When in fact, that was probably the best class for the kids because you were actually engaged in thinking about it in the moment. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you. And in fact, in Britain, we've already had a couple of people outside of, you know, the teaching world, because they've been, you know, people have been forced to teach their own kids, even if they're not teachers. So Ruby Wax, who's a, you know, a comedian here, and I can never pronounce his last name, the man who wrote His Dark Materials, Michael, you know who I'm talking about, but he's writing a book on pedagogy, you know, or on the theories of teaching, and you just think, wow, this is a turn up for the books. So that, yeah, I think we're really going to see a huge change in education, and hopefully for the better. But you know, one of the things that worries me is that it's all happening so fast that people are going to be pushed into making decisions that are not necessarily out of pedagogic. You know, it's out of expediency and commercial pressures rather than because of it's best for the students or it's best for the learning of further learning. So thanks so much for helping me to just document what's going on, because I think it's amazing and fascinating. And I just, we wouldn't have been having this conversation if it wasn't for the pandemic. So I'm very pleased and very thankful that you've been able to join me today.
Absolutely. Been an absolute joy, Christy. Thank you.